All right. Strap in, everyone, for today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling a topic that's super personal, but at the same time, like, universally fascinating, you know?
Uh,
What really influences mate selection.
yeah,
We're ditching those shallow, like, cliches about money and looks. We're going way deeper than that.
right.
We're exploring insights from evolutionary psychology, observations from Dr. Jordan Peterson. Get ready for some serious food for thought.
Yeah,
Because the premise here is that the choices that we make in partners are actually driven by something much more profound than we might realize.
you're absolutely right. It's amazing how much of our decision making happens below the surface,
Yeah. Yeah,
driven by evolutionary forces that have been shaping us for millennia.
totally.
We might think we're making decisions based on certain criteria, but there's a whole evolutionary history at play there.
100%. And to kick things off, we're going to dive into a study that really challenges, I think, a lot of those surface level assumptions. Researchers presented women with pictures of the same man, but with a twist.
Okay.
They depicted him in 4 different scenarios: rich and useful, rich and useless,
Okay.
poor and useful, and then, well, poor and useless.
Right.
So I'm guessing the results weren't what most people would expect.
They were pretty surprising, to say the least. Um, Women consistently rated the useful men as more attractive, regardless of their wealth.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It kind of seems counterintuitive at first, but it makes a lot more sense when we dig a little deeper.
Okay, so let's unpack this usefulness. So it's not just about being handy around the house, right?
Right.
The study also delved into personality traits,
Yeah.
and that's where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. So, what the researchers found was that these useful men were perceived as higher in openness, which
Yes.
we often link to intelligence and curiosity,
Mhm.
and also conscientiousness, which points to things like hardworking and dependable.
So it's not about a man's bank account. It's about those qualities that kind of show, hey, this guy's capable.
Exactly.
That's reliable. He's, likely to be successful.
Right.
I can see how that would be appealing, especially from like an evolutionary standpoint. But is this all about women seeking financial security?
Not necessarily. I mean, Jordan Peterson actually argues that women aren't after resources directly.
Yeah.
What they're looking for is the qualities that predict resource acquisition.
Interesting.
It's about finding a partner who embodies those traits that historically, would have led to success in providing and protecting.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about it, especially for women who are bearing and raising children, like, it would be super crucial to choose a partner who could not only provide food and shelter,
Right.
but also like navigate the challenges of their environment effectively.
Exactly. And this is what Peterson calls selection pressure. And it's likely played a major role in shaping how we evolved as humans.
Yeah.
It's driven men to compete and excel, constantly striving to demonstrate their worth, climb up those dominance hierarchies.
Which actually leads us perfectly into another concept that's, I think, often misunderstood and even misrepresented, which is hypergamy. And I have to admit, like, I had some preconceived notions about what that term really means.
Yeah.
Before I actually did a little research on this.
It's a word that's thrown around a lot, but not a lot of people actually understand the nuances of it. So hypergamy essentially describes women choosing partners across and up dominance hierarchies.
Right.
But, it's not as simple as just saying women want a guy with higher socioeconomic status.
Right, right. So if it's not just about money and like climbing the social ladder, what are those key factors at play?
It boils down to competence, leadership, the capacity to contribute to the group or the family in meaningful ways.
Yeah.
Go back to those useful men. They weren't just seen as potential providers. It's like they embodied those qualities that suggest they could lead, protect,
Yeah.
solve problems effectively.
It's wild to think about that something so deeply rooted in like our evolutionary past could still be influencing our choices today.
Right.
And it also like challenges a lot of the stereotypical ideas about mate selection, I think.
100%.
Yeah.
And it kind of highlights that female choice has played a major role in shaping how we evolved as humans.
Interesting.
If we compare human mating patterns to, let's say, our primate relatives like chimpanzees, we actually see
Yeah.
a pretty big difference.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that. So how do chimps choose their mates?
Well, female chimps generally are less selective when it comes to choosing a mate. They don't exhibit the same patterns of hypergamy that we see in humans.
So that suggests that like human females have had a much more active role in driving the evolution of certain traits in males.
Ex-
That's a pretty powerful concept. I'm starting to see how all these different pieces fit together. But if hypergamy is about more than just social climbing, what does it say about like those common misconceptions that we often hear?
I think it really challenges the uh, simple notion that women are just drawn to wealth or status symbols. It points to a deeper, evolutionary drive,
Yeah.
partnering with someone who's got the skills and qualities that contribute to survival and success.
I think you've given us a lot to ponder already, just with these ideas of usefulness, this
Mhm.
evolutionary pressure, this concept of hypergamy. It's
Mm.
all, it's painting a much more complex picture of like what really motivates our choices, when it comes to partners.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's even more to uncover
Oh,
around that.
yeah. There's definitely more to uncover. And as we delve a little deeper, we're going to see how all of this connects to something even more fascinating, which is the concept of a platonic ideal that influences our perceptions of attractiveness. But we'll save that for next time.
Can't wait. Okay, so you mentioned this platonic ideal.
Right. And its connection to attractiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've really got me curious.
Okay.
It sounds almost philosophical.
Yeah.
What do we actually mean by platonic ideal in this context?
Well, it's actually rooted in some pretty fascinating research. Think about those studies, where researchers take a bunch of different faces and they average all the features together.
Right.
They combine like dozens of faces and they create a composite image.
Yeah, I think I've seen those.
Yeah, exactly.
And the resulting face is usually like really attractive.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that this composite, this averaged face, it's often rated as more attractive than any of the individual faces that were used to create it.
Interesting.
Like there's this central idealized, human form that emerges.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to it, maybe subconsciously.
So it's not about like unique features or standing out from the crowd.
Right.
It's more about embodying this sort of like average beauty.
Which I gotta admit is a little counterintuitive.
It might seem counterintuitive at first, but when you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense.
Okay.
Um, this ideal form could actually represent like a blueprint for genetic health and fitness.
Oh, interesting.
A face that's too far away from that average could be a signal of potential developmental issues or other underlying problems.
That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
So we're drawn to averageness because it kind of suggests good genes and overall health.
Exactly.
Like our brains are just wired to kind of pick up on these subtle cues.
Yeah.
But is that something unique to humans? Like, do we see that in other species?
There's evidence that this preference for averageness actually goes beyond just humans.
Okay.
For example, studies have shown that even butterflies seem to prefer symmetrical mates.
What?
Yeah. They're less likely to pick partners that deviate too far from, the ideal butterfly form.
Wow. That's amazing. Butterflies and humans drawn to like similar patterns,
Right.
symmetry and averageness. I mean, it really points to how deeply ingrained these preferences are.
Right.
Now, I'm wondering, have you ever noticed this pull toward averageness in your own life?
Mm.
Like maybe in the faces you find attractive, or even like art or design.
It's definitely something to think about for sure. Our aesthetic preferences, whether we're conscious of it or not, I think, are often influenced by these deep-seated evolutionary forces.
Yeah.
The things we find beautiful or appealing might actually be tied to, signals of health and fitness,
Right.
or even like genetic compatibility.
This is all really interesting stuff. And I think all this talk about attractiveness and mate selection brings us to a topic that can be, a little uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it's definitely part of the human experience, and that's rejection.
Right.
And Peterson certainly doesn't shy away from this,
No, he doesn't.
especially when it comes to the challenges that men often face in dating.
Yeah, he's very upfront about it. He argues that chronic rejection in dating often comes from personal shortcomings rather than just bad luck.
Hmm.
He suggests that, men who are consistently getting rejected really need to take a hard look at themselves
Yeah.
and think about what they could improve.
That's a tough message to hear, though.
Yeah.
Is he saying that people who are repeatedly rejected are like inherently flawed or undesirable?
No, not necessarily. I think his point is that it's really important for us to look inward
Okay.
and honestly assess how our actions and behaviors, might be contributing to these patterns that we see in our lives.
Yeah.
So rather than blaming external factors or feeling sorry for ourselves, we can choose to view rejection as an opportunity to grow.
So instead of asking, why am I being rejected? We
Right.
could ask, like, what can I learn about myself from this experience?
Exactly.
It's about taking ownership rather than playing the victim.
Exactly. And remember, rejection doesn't mean that we're inherently flawed or unworthy.
Right.
It often just means that we're not the right fit for that particular person or situation.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's an important part of the process, of
Right.
finding the right people, the right relationships.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Rejection can kind of redirect us,
Right.
point us towards something that's better suited to our needs and desires.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can be really hard to see that opportunity, though, when you're in it.
Right.
Like when you're actually feeling that hurt and that disappointment.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for our listeners on like how to actually shift that perspective,
Yeah.
how to use those experiences for growth?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness.
Mm.
Just taking some time to honestly reflect on our patterns,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
our behaviors, even what signals we might be sending out, I think can be super valuable.
So instead of asking like, why am I being rejected? Maybe we ask, what can I like learn about myself from this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about, taking ownership
Yeah.
rather than just playing the victim.
Right. And I think something you said earlier is really important. Like rejection doesn't mean that we're, inherently flawed
Right.
or unworthy.
100%. It might just mean we're not the right fit
Yeah.
for that person or that situation.
Yeah.
And that's totally okay.
Yeah. It's all part of the process.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
part of finding the right people, the right relationships.
That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground today.
We have.
Before we wrap up, why don't we take a minute to recap some of those key takeaways from our deep dive into mate selection?
Sure. So we started by exploring this idea that women's mate preferences are really shaped by these deep evolutionary drives, right?
Mm-hmm.
That prioritize usefulness rather than, superficial wealth.
Yeah.
It's about finding a partner who has traits like openness, conscientiousness, the ability to provide and protect,
Yeah.
those qualities that historically would have, contributed to survival and success.
Right. And we also discussed how that evolutionary pressure has likely pushed men to compete,
Right.
excel, constantly striving to like prove themselves, you
Yeah.
know.
Climb those dominance hierarchies.
We also delved into the concept of hypergamy,
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of came to understand that it's about much more than like just finding a partner with a higher socioeconomic status.
Exactly. It's about choosing a partner based on their competence, leadership, the ability to contribute meaningfully
Mm-hmm.
to the group or to the family. So this preference for, someone who can lead and provide has really shaped how humans evolved.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point. And then we moved beyond individual traits and we explored the super fascinating concept of the platonic ideal.
Right.
It seems like we're actually drawn to a certain averageness,
Right.
kind of a balanced and symmetrical form that might actually signal genetic health and fitness, even across different species, which was mind-blowing.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
And, of course, we couldn't leave out the dreaded topic of rejection,
Right.
but I think we did a good job of reframing it.
We did.
Instead of looking at it as like a personal failure,
Right.
we talked about how it can actually be a huge opportunity
Yeah.
for self-awareness, growth, and ultimately becoming, the best versions of ourselves.
100%. And I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Mm.
How might these insights actually apply to other parts of your life? Not just romantic relationships.
Yeah.
Think about your friendships, your collaborations, even like your own personal development.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself drawn to people who embody those, useful qualities?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Do you strive to be more competent, contribute more?
The dynamics that we talked about today, they aren't just limited to romance.
Yeah.
They're, woven into the fabric of how we interact with each other.
Exactly.
And they're shaping our preferences, influencing our choices, across all these different aspects of life.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
Yeah, great advice. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Absolutely.
Until next time.